I had ruled the Kessin Accord for 31 years, and in all that time I had never once set foot inside a human district under martial law. I had read reports about them. I had signed the directives that created them, walled them, starved them of supply convoys when the Accord Council decided that was the only language the border worlds understood. I had never smelled one. I had never heard the particular quiet that settles over a street, where everyone has learned that being seen is more dangerous than being unseen. I learned it in the first 10 minutes inside District Ashvane. Empress. The man beside me said the word low, almost a warning, and put a hand flat against my shoulder to stop me from stepping past a doorway. Not there. That building's marked. I looked at the doorway. There was nothing on it that I could read, no Accord glyph, no warning band, nothing my eyes had been trained across 3 decades to recognize as danger. Just a door, paint peeling, a child's drawing taped crooked in the window above it. Marked how, I said. Marked how doesn't matter to you tonight, Mercer Doyle said. Marked means we go around it. That's the whole lesson. You don't need to know why. You need to do what the district tells you, and the district just told you. I had been Empress of the Kessin Accord since I was 26 years old. Men did not speak to me that way. I had forgotten, somewhere in 3 decades of golden halls and kneeling courts, that there were places in my own empire where my title bought me nothing at all, where a man with weathered hands and a contractor's identification badge clipped to a jacket that had been mended at both elbows knew more about staying alive than I did, and where my survival for the next 6 hours depended entirely on whether I was willing to listen to him. I was willing. I had not expected to be when the council briefed me that morning. I had expected to walk in flanked by guard, recover what had been stolen, and walk out before nightfall. The guard had been turned back at the checkpoint. District law. No armed Accord personnel passed the line. No exceptions, not even for me. And so I had gone in with 1 escort instead of 12. A human civilian contractor the district authority vouched for. A man who did supply runs and equipment repair for 3 of the relief clinics that the Accord pretended it did not fund, because funding them openly would have meant admitting the quarantine had failed to do what it was built to do. The checkpoint itself had unsettled me more than I expected. I had crossed 100 borders in my reign, formal ones, with banners and honor guards and carpets unrolled for my boots, and this was none of that. A length of barricade fencing, sandbags gone soft and gray with years of weather, a guard post manned by district enforcers who looked at my Accord seal the way a man looks at a coin he suspects is counterfeit. They had made me surrender my sidearm. They had made me surrender, too, the small ceremonial circlet I wore beneath my collar on formal business, on the grounds that anything bright enough to catch a streetlight was a liability past the line. I had handed it over without complaint, which surprised the enforcer more than it surprised me. "She's with me," Doyle had said simply at the gate, and that single sentence had done more to grant me passage into District Ashvane than 31 years of Imperial seal ever could have. I noted it. I did not yet understand what it meant that a man's word carried more currency here than my own name. I did not yet know that the thing the Accord had stolen back, the artifact, the small sealed case the council wanted returned before a diplomatic summit in 11 days, was the least important thing I would find in District Ashvane that night. We walked for 40 minutes through streets that had once been a transit corridor, back when the district was still a district and not a wall. Doyle did not talk much. When he did, it was short and practical: this corner, not that one. Walk in the middle, not the edges. If anyone calls out a number, keep walking, don't look up, it isn't for us. He was perhaps 50 years old, gray coming hard into a dark beard, and he moved through the ruined streets the way a man moves through his own house in the dark. Not fast, not cautious in any way that showed, just certain. "You don't ask why I'm here," I said, somewhere past the second checkpoint. "Didn't seem like my business." Most men would want to know why the Empress of the Accord is walking through a quarantine district at night with one escort and no guard. Most men aren't getting paid by the hour, he said, and something in his face when he said it told me it was a joke and also entirely true, both at once. You want to tell me, I'll listen. You don't, we keep walking. Either way, we get to the Farron Street Clinic before the patrol rotation changes, or we don't get there clean. I had been handled my entire adult life, by advisors who wanted something, by suitors who wanted something, by a council that had wanted, above all things, my obedience to a no-fraternization law I had voted to enact myself, in grief, the year my daughter disappeared. Doyle did not want anything from me that I could see. He wanted to get me to a clinic and back out again before the patrol came through, and that was the whole of his concern, and there was something in the plainness of it that I found I could not stop noticing. My daughter crossed into a district like this one, I said. 11 years ago, we believe she died in it. He didn't stop walking. He didn't make the soft sound people make when they want you to know they've registered your grief. He only nodded once and said, "Believe or no?" "Believe," I said. "We never recovered her." "Then you don't know," Doyle said. "Worth saying out loud. People say believe like it's the same as no when they've stopped being able to bear the difference." I had not expected to be corrected by a contractor on a supply route. I found, walking the last stretch toward Farron Street with the cold coming down off the broken transit towers, that I did not mind it. We passed a courtyard where a dozen people, human and Accord both, stood in a ragged line around a single working water spigot, waiting their turn with the patience of people who had learned that impatience cost more than it ever bought. An old Accord man, exiled or stranded, I did not ask which, nodded to Doyle as we passed, and Doyle nodded back, unhurried, the small economical greeting of two men who had crossed paths 100 times before and saw no need to make more of it than that. "You know him," I said. "Know most of them this stretch. Been running this route 11 years. He said it without weight, but something in the number caught at me. The same 11 years I had spent believing my daughter dead, this man had spent walking these same streets, fixing what broke, learning which doors were marked and which corners held early warning eyes for the patrol rotations. District doesn't run on Accord law in here. Doesn't really run on human law either, not since the wall went up. Runs on who you can trust to tell you the truth about a marked door. That's the whole currency. And they trust you." "Took about 4 years," he said. "You don't get trusted quick in a place like this. You get trusted slow by doing what you said you'd do over and over until people stop waiting for the time you don't." He glanced sideways at me, the first time he'd really looked at me directly since the checkpoint. "Figured that was worth telling you. Whatever you find tonight in here, it's going to have been built the same way. Slow. Nobody builds anything in this district fast and has it last." I did not understand, yet, why he'd chosen to tell me that. I would understand within the hour. The transit towers gave way to older residential blocks, then to a cluster of converted depot buildings where Doyle finally slowed his pace, checking a cross street I would not have known to check, before turning us down toward a long, low building with old root boards still bolted above its door. "Farron Street," he said. "We're early. Good. Means we'll be back through the checkpoint before the rotation changes." He paused at the door, and for a moment something in his weathered face shifted, not quite a warning, but close to one. "Whatever you find in there tonight, Empress, and I think you should know I don't believe this is just about a stolen case, not the way the district authority briefed it to me. I'd ask you to let it be what it is before you decide what to do about it. This district's had enough decided about it from outside. Wouldn't want you to be one more." I did not know, then, how exactly his warning would prove itself true. I only knew that I trusted the plainness of it, the way I had not trusted a single piece of counsel given to me by the council in longer than I could remember. The clinic on Farron Street had been a transit depot once. I could still see the old root boards bolted high on one wall, glyphs for stops that no longer ran anywhere. and it had been converted, badly and then well, into 3 rooms of cots and 1 room of medical stock that Doyle told me, without being asked. He restocked twice a month out of his own contract fees, because the Accord supply allocation for the district covered perhaps a third of what the clinic actually needed. Accord doesn't fund it, I said. Accord doesn't admit it exists, he said. There's a difference. Someone signs off on the supply line every month, just nobody signs their actual name. I did not ask whose name was on the line. I suspected, by the careful way he said it, that he already knew I would not like the answer, and that he had decided not to make me carry it tonight on top of everything else. The clinic's keeper was a woman named Sorrel, broad-shouldered, gray-streaked hair pulled back hard, hands that moved like she had set more bones than she could count. She looked at me for a long moment when Doyle brought me through the door, not at my robes, which I had at least had the sense to leave off in favor of a plain traveling coat, but at my face, the way people look at something they are trying to place. "You favor someone," she said finally, "can't think who." "I get that a great deal," I said, which was a lie. I had been told my whole life that I resembled no one, that the Solène line bred true and singular, each Empress unlike the one before her, a fact the Accord propagandists had turned into a kind of doctrine. No one had ever told me I favored someone. I did not understand in that moment why the words went through me like cold water. The artifact case was where the district authorities' report said it would be, locked in Sorrel's back storeroom among medical supply crates, taken in by a runner who'd found it abandoned near the wall and brought it to the one place in the district where bringing in Accord property wouldn't get you killed for collaboration. Sorrel unlocked the storeroom herself, walked me past shelves of bandage rolls and rationed antiseptic stocked thinner than any Accord clinic I had ever toured, and set the case in my hands without ceremony. "Whoever stole it didn't want it for what's inside," she said, watching me check the seal. "Wanted it for the trade value at the wall. People sell anything with an Accord stamp on it out here. Doesn't matter what it is. Stamp alone's worth a month of supply on the Black Corridor." She said it without bitterness, simply as a fact of the place, and I understood, hearing it, exactly how far the gap had grown between what the Accord believed it provided its border districts and what those districts actually survived on. Recovering it took 4 minutes. I could have been back at the checkpoint within the hour, the whole errand closed, the 11 days until the summit untouched by anything but a line in a report. I did not leave within the hour. It was the child who stopped me. A girl, perhaps 9, sitting cross-legged on a cot in the second room doing something careful and absorbed with a length of wire and a broken clinic light fixture, repairing it the way she had clearly watched someone repair 100 small things before her, patient, unhurried, tongue caught between her teeth in concentration. She had dark hair, human dark, the kind that does not occur naturally anywhere in the Accord bloodlines. And her eyes, when she glanced up at the sound of strangers in the doorway, were a pale, clear gold that did occur in exactly one bloodline I knew. My own. I did not move. I do not think I breathed for several seconds. Doyle, beside me, went very still in the particular way of a man who has just understood that something has happened that is not his to manage. "Wren," Sorrel called, not alarmed, just announcing visitors the way she likely announced visitors a dozen times a week. "Come say hello." This is, she glanced at me, uncertain what title to use in a place where my title meant nothing and everything at once. A visitor. The girl set down the wire and the light fixture with the same unhurried care she'd been using to repair them, climbed off the cot, and crossed the room to stand in front of me with the bearing of a child who had been taught, somewhere by someone, how to greet a stranger properly, chin level, eyes meeting mine, neither cringing nor performing. It was a bearing I recognized. I had spent 31 years drilling exactly that posture into court pages half her age, and none of them had ever managed it as naturally as this human dark, gold-eyed child standing in a converted transit depot in a quarantine district, looking up at me without the faintest idea of who I was. "Hello," she said. "Are you here for the medicine delivery? My mother said the delivery's running late this month." "Your mother," I said. My voice did not sound like my own voice. "She's at the South Clinic today. She does the burn unit there on Tuesdays." Wren tilted her head, studying me with an open, unhurried curiosity that had nothing guarded in it at all. "You have the same color eyes as my mother, almost exactly. Nobody else here has eyes like that. People say it's strange." Sorrel had gone very quiet behind me. Doyle had not moved at all. "What is your mother's name?" I said. "Liana," the girl said. "Well, Liana Vash here, but she told me once that wasn't always her name." I sat down. I do not remember choosing to sit. I remember the cot's edge meeting the back of my knees and the room tilting very slightly, and Sorrel's hand catching my elbow with the same unhurried, practiced steadiness she likely used on every patient who came through her door in shock, and Doyle saying nothing at all, simply standing close enough that I understood, without being told, that he would not let me fall. "Are you all right?" Wren asked, with the same unhurried practicality she'd brought to the wire and the light fixture, crouching slightly to look up into my face the way I imagined she'd been taught to check on injured patients who came through Sorrel's door. "You went very pale. Sorrel, should I get water?" "Get water, love," Sorrel said gently, and the girl went unbothered, certain in her small task, the way children are certain when the adults around them have never once told them the world was too frightening for them to be useful in it. "She does that," Sorrel said quietly, once Wren was out of earshot, fetching a cup from the supply shelf. "Helps, whatever's broken, whoever's hurting. Her mother raised her that way, said a person ought to be useful before they're afraid if they can manage it. Castor used to say the same thing before he died. I expect that's where she really learned it, watching the two of them." "Castor," I repeated. The name meant nothing to me yet, and everything all at once. The shape of a stranger's life folded invisibly around my own daughter's for years I had spent believing her gone. Wren returned with the water, pressed it carefully into my hands, the way one hands something to someone whose hands might be unsteady, and then, without any prompting at all, simply sat down on the cot beside me and stayed there, her small warm hand finding mine, and holding it with the same unhurried patience she brought to everything else, as if comforting a stranger who had gone pale and quiet in a doorway were no different, in the end, from mending a broken light. Liana came back from the South Clinic at dusk, and I watched her cross the depot floor toward the back room before she had seen me at all, watched the particular way she walked, the set of her shoulders, 11 years older and harder and thinner than the daughter I remembered, and I knew her before she ever lifted her eyes and found me sitting on a cot in a converted transit depot with her daughter's hand resting, without fear, in mine. She stopped in the doorway. She did not run to me. I understood why a moment later, when I saw her eyes go first, not to my face, but past me, counting the room, checking the exits, the old instinct of a woman who has spent 11 years assuming that any unexpected face in any doorway might be the one that finally ends the life she has built. Only when she had finished that terrible, practiced check did she let herself look at me directly. "Mother," she said, just that. 11 years, and that was all the room had space for. For a long moment neither of us moved. Wren, sensing something in the air that even her practical good nature could not name, slid quietly off the cot and went to stand near Sorrel by the storeroom door, watching her mother and her grandmother look at each other across a room that had suddenly gone very small. "I was told you died," I said. "I was told. I voted for the law that made you a fugitive in the place you died, Liana. I have spent 11 years grieving a daughter I helped exile." "I know," she said. "I read the obituary you gave me. Sorrel found a copy years ago." It was a kind obituary. Her voice did not shake. She had clearly decided, at some point in those 11 years, that shaking was a luxury she could no longer afford. It didn't mention that I was alive in a district you'd cut off the supply lines to. It mentioned that I'd disgraced the line by loving a human man, and that the Accord mourned the loss of a promising heir to circumstances unbecoming her station. I had not written that line. I had not needed to. The council wrote such lines for me as a matter of course, and I had signed it without reading past the first paragraph, because reading further would have meant admitting what the law I'd enacted had actually done to my own child. You could have come back, I said, and heard, even as I said it, how it sounded, how easily it slid into blame, how it placed the 11 years of distance on her shoulders rather than the law's. I tried again. I do not mean that as an accusation. I am trying to understand. There must have been a year, a single year out of 11 when you considered it. There were several, Liana said. The first year especially. I told myself I'd wait until Castor and I had something built, proof I hadn't simply thrown my life away for nothing, proof I could bring home that would make the council see what I'd seen in him. By the second year I understood there was no proof that would have mattered to that council. By the third year I had Ren, and the question stopped being about what I could prove to you and started being about what I owed her, a mother who wasn't constantly bracing to lose everything for loving the wrong man, a home that wasn't built on the hope of eventual forgiveness from a throne that had already written me dead. She looked at Ren briefly, and something in her face softened before it hardened again, turning back to me. By the fourth year, I'd stopped writing the letters I never sent. I want you to understand that wasn't cruelty, Mother. It was survival. I could not raise children who knew their whole existence was a thing their grandmother's law had made shameful. I had to choose, every day, to build something whole instead of something waiting. His name was Castor, she went on, before I could find words for any of it. He was a transit engineer. He kept this depot running for 6 years on parts he scavenged and favors he traded, because the Accord wouldn't fund infrastructure for a district it had already decided to let die slowly instead of openly. He never once asked me what I'd given up to be here. He asked what I needed, every day, the way you'd ask anyone, not as a kindness owed to a fallen princess, just as the plain thing a person does for someone they love. He died 3 years ago, a structural collapse, nothing dramatic, nothing the Accord caused directly, just bad luck in a district that the Accord's neglect had made considerably more dangerous than it needed to be. I have 3 children by him. Ren you've met. There's Pell, who's 7, and the baby, Asha, who is barely 2. Half human, I said. The words came out of me without my permission. The same shocked, stupid words I had been turning over since the moment Ren had looked up at me with my own eyes set in a human dark face. My grandchildren are half human. Your grandchildren are mine, Liana said, and for the first time something in her voice cracked, not into grief but into something closer to anger. 11 years of banked anger finally given a target who could understand the words. They are also, yes, half human, because their father was a human man who treated me with more dignity in 6 years than the entire Accord court managed in 26. And if that is the thing you came here to be shocked by, Mother, then I would rather you had stayed in your golden halls and let me keep believing you were simply gone. I did not survive 11 years in this district, to have my children's existence treated as a scandal in the same breath, as a recovered shipping case. That is not how I meant it, I said, and found my own voice unsteady for the first time since I had sat down on the cot. Liana, I am not shocked by what your children are. I am shocked by how long I let myself believe a lie that was easier to grieve than the truth would have been to face. I am shocked that a law I signed in my own grief took 11 years from me that I cannot get back, and gave them instead to a council that found it administratively convenient to let me keep believing you were dead rather than tell me you had simply chosen to be free of us. That is the thing I am shocked by, not them. Never them. I did not have an answer for her. I had spent 31 years as Empress learning how to answer everything, how to meet rebellion with law, grief with ceremony, scandal with a carefully worded statement that closed the matter before it could become a wound. I had no statement for this. I had only a small girl's hand, which had not let go of mine the entire time her mother spoke, and the steady, unhurried presence of a contractor standing near the door who had not said a single word since Liana entered the room, who had simply stayed close enough that I understood, again, without being told, that he would let this unfold exactly as it needed to and would not let either of us come to harm in the unfolding. "Show me," I said finally, "show me what 11 years built. I am not asking to undo it. I do not think it can be undone, and I am no longer certain I would want it undone if it could be. I am asking you to show me because I have spent 11 years grieving the wrong thing, and I would like, before I die, to know my grandchildren's faces." Liana studied me for a long moment, the same unhurried, evaluating look I had seen her daughter give me an hour before, and I understood then where the girl had learned it. Not from court pages, not from drilled etiquette, but from a mother who had spent 11 years learning to read a room before trusting it. "Pel's asleep," she said finally. "Asha too, you can see them." Quietly, she led me through to the third room, where 2 more cots held 2 more sleeping children, a boy with his mother's dark hair, and a stillness about his sleeping face that was entirely, unmistakably the Solène Line's own composure, and a baby curled small with one fist near her mouth, gold-lashed, breathing slow. I stood in the doorway and looked at them for a long time, and felt, standing there, something I had not let myself feel in 11 years. Not the clean, manageable grief I had built a court ceremony around, but the raw, unceremonial weight of having nearly lost something I had not even known to count as mine. "Pel has Castor's hands," Liana said quietly beside me, her voice softer now than it had been in the front room, the anger spent or at least set down for the moment. "Look how he holds them, even sleeping curled like he's already working on something. Castor used to sleep the same way. I'd find him at the workbench some nights, fallen asleep mid-repair, hands still curved around whatever he'd been fixing." She reached down and adjusted the boy's blanket with the automatic, unthinking gentleness of a mother who has performed the same small gesture 1,000 nights running. "Asha doesn't have much of either of us yet. Babies don't, not really, not until they're older. But she has my mother's stubbornness already. Sorrel will tell you. She refuses to nap on anyone's schedule but her own." "I had that same stubbornness," I said. "My own mother despaired of it for years. I am told it skipped no generation of our line going back as far as anyone troubled to record." "Then I suppose Asha comes by it honestly," Liana said, and for the first time since she had entered the room, something close to a smile moved across her face, small, careful, the first uncomplicated thing to pass between us in 11 years. Ren came and stood beside me, still holding my hand, patient in the way she had been patient with the broken light fixture, willing to let a slow thing take however long it needed to take. "Are you going to take us somewhere?" she asked finally, quietly, not frightened, just practical, the way a child who has grown up in a district under martial law learns to ask practical questions about her own fate. "Sorrel said sometimes when important people come, families have to go somewhere after." "No," I said. The word came out steadier than I expected. "I am not going to take you anywhere you do not choose to go. I came here to recover something the Accord lost. I am leaving having found something the Accord never knew it had thrown away." It took the better part of 2 hours after that to say what still needed saying, Liana's fuller account of the law that had exiled her, delivered without softening now that the worst of it had already been spoken aloud once. My own account of the 11 years of grief I had built around a daughter I'd assumed dead rather than abandoned, which was its own kind of cowardice, and I did not try to dress it as anything else. Doyle stayed the entire time near the door, saying almost nothing, refusing twice when Sorrel tried to send him out for the patrol rotation change, until finally Liana herself looked at him and said simply, "He stays. He's the one who keeps Sorrel's lights on. He's the one who taught Pell to read a supply manifest. If my mother's going to understand any of this, she should understand that part too. I just fix what's broken, Doyle said, the first thing he'd offered unprompted all night. Wasn't looking for credit for it. That's rather the point, I said, and found, for the first time in longer than I could remember, that I meant a compliment entirely, without any court formula behind it. You came with me into a district under martial law to recover a piece of Accord property, and instead you stood in a doorway for 2 hours while I learned my own family had been alive 11 years without me, and you never once tried to make the moment about your own part in it. I do not think the Accord has produced a court advisor in 3 decades with that particular discipline. Wasn't my moment to make about anything, Doyle said. Wasn't yours either, not really, was hers. He nodded toward Liana, and theirs, toward the sleeping children, toward Wren still standing close by my side. I just kept the door. I did not leave the district that night the way I had entered it. The patrol rotation changed. Doyle walked me back through streets I now understood, however imperfectly, to be governed by a logic the Accord had never bothered to learn, marked doors and quiet corners, and the particular silence of a place that had survived 11 years of official neglect by becoming exquisitely good at surviving. We did not speak much on the walk back. There did not seem to be anything left that words could usefully do. At the checkpoint, my guard captain looked at my face and did not ask what had happened in the 6 hours I'd been gone, though I could see the question in him, and I found I had no immediate intention of answering it, not until I had decided, for myself, what I intended to do with what I now knew. I spent the 7 days that followed in a kind of careful silence, reviewing 11 years of council records I had never thought to question, supply allocation reports for District Ashvin that showed, in dry administrative language, a steady decline I had signed off on without reading past the summary line each year. The original exile order bearing my own signature, dated the week after Liana's disappearance, written by advisors grieving on my behalf in a grief I had been too broken to manage myself. Obituary language that I now read 3 times over, hunting for the moment I might have caught the lie in it, and finding none, because I had simply trusted the people whose job it was to manage my sorrow for me, and had never once thought to ask whether managing it meant they had also quietly buried the truth along with it. I am rescinding the fraternization law, I told the council 7 days later, in a session I called myself rather than waiting for the next scheduled sitting. Effective immediately. I'm also opening full supply allocation to every quarantine district under Accord jurisdiction, retroactive to cover what should have been provided for the last 11 years, beginning with District Ashvin. There was the predictable uproar. There is always a predictable uproar. 31 years had taught me to let it exhaust itself before I spoke again. Councillor Pravish, who had drafted the original exile order on my behalf and likely believed he had done me a kindness in doing so, was the first to find his footing. Your Grace, the fraternization law exists to preserve the integrity of the bloodline succession, to rescind it without council deliberation. The bloodline succession, I said, has already occurred without this council's permission, Councillor, 11 years ago, in a district this council chose to starve rather than acknowledge. I did not come here today to deliberate. I came here to inform this body of a fact, and then to act on it. My daughter is alive, I said, when the room had quieted enough to hear it. She has been alive for 11 years in a district this council chose to starve rather than acknowledge. She built a life there with a human man this council would have called unfit, and that life produced 3 children this council would have called unfit, and I have met them. I have held my granddaughter's hand. I have watched my grandson sleep with my own family's stillness on his sleeping face. I will not apologize to this chamber for any of it. I will instead ask this chamber to explain to me, individually by name, how each of you slept at night knowing what the quarantine policy you voted for actually cost. Not in Accord casualties, which this body tracks meticulously, but in daughters and grandchildren. In 11 years, a mother spent believing her own child was dead, because it was administratively simpler than learning she was merely free. No one answered me. I had not expected anyone to. I let the silence sit in the chamber for as long as it needed to, the way Doyle had let silence sit in a doorway in District Ashvane, and then I closed the session and walked out without waiting for the formal adjournment, which I understood, even as I did it, was the first genuinely undignified thing I had done as Empress in 31 years, and the first thing in just as long that had felt entirely, unambiguously correct. I go back to District Ashvane now, when the council session calendar allows it, which I have arranged, deliberately, to be often. The supply lines run full now, every month, no quiet allocation buried under a third of a manifest line. The checkpoint enforcers know my face by sight and no longer make me surrender the small ceremonial circlet at the gate, though I have taken to leaving it behind regardless, in a drawer in my chambers, because I have found I prefer the district's version of me to the court's. Wren still fixes broken things with the same unhurried patience, though she has graduated from light fixtures to the clinic's water filtration system, which Doyle taught her to maintain over the better part of a year. The same way, I gather, he taught her brother to read a supply manifest and will likely teach her sister something else entirely. In time, whatever the youngest one turns out to need taught. She has started asking me, on my visits, about the Accord, not with longing, I think, but with the same practical curiosity she brings to a broken pump, turning the strange machinery of court and law over in her hands to see how it's built, and whether it could be built better. I have begun answering her questions honestly, including the ones that do not flatter the institution I lead, because I have decided that a child who learned to read a marked door before she learned to read a storybook deserves better than the careful half-truths I once let the council write on my behalf. Pell has taken to the workbench the way his father did, Sorrel tells me, the same curled hand sleep, the same patient absorption in whatever small mechanism is in front of him. He asked me, the second time I visited, whether empresses were allowed to get their hands dirty, and seemed genuinely relieved when I told him that I had simply never been permitted to find out, and that I intended to remedy that, starting with him, if he would teach me. He has been teaching me, slowly, the names of tools I had never once had cause to learn in 31 years of governing an empire that ran. I now understand, on exactly this kind of unglamorous competence in every district I had never properly visited. Asha is old enough now to recognize my face at the door, and greets me each time with the same delighted, uncomplicated shriek she greets Sorrel and Doyle with, too young yet to understand titles or thrones or the particular weight of the word grandmother, old enough only to understand that this is a person who comes back, reliably, and that reliability, in a district like Ashvane, is the rarest and most valuable thing a person can offer. Liana does not call me mother easily yet. I am not certain she ever fully will, and I have stopped expecting it, because I understand now that 11 years of grief cannot be repaid with a single visit or a single rescinded law, however overdue. What she has given me instead is something I did not expect to want as much as I have come to want it: an open door. A standing invitation to sit on a cot in a converted transit depot and watch my grandchildren grow, slowly, plainly, without ceremony. The way Doyle still comes by twice a month with a supply crate on his shoulder and never once asks for anything beyond a place to set it down. He and Liana are not married. I asked her once carefully whether that was a thing she wanted, and she told me without any heat in it at all that she had married once for love and lost him, and that what she had with Doyle now, the steady presence, the shared work of keeping a clinic and 3 children fed and running, the easy companionship that had grown slowly between 2 people who had each spent years learning the particular discipline of showing up, did not need a council seal or a court ceremony to be real. I did not press the matter further. I had learned by then that the things built slowest in District Ashving were generally the ones built to last, and I had no wish to rush something that had survived this long precisely by refusing to be rushed. "You could have stayed in your golden halls," Sorrel said to me once, watching me on the floor of the clinic's second room, helping Pell sort spare parts by size the way his father had apparently taught him to do years before he was old enough to understand what most of them were for. Lots of important people would have sent supply, sent an apology through the right channel, never come back themselves. "I spent 31 years believing the golden halls were where I belonged," I said. "I am beginning to understand I had that precisely backward. The hall was never the place I belonged. It was simply the place I had been told for so long that belonging looked like." "Funny thing to learn this late," Sorrel said, not unkindly. "Better late than not at all," I said. "I have come to believe most of the things worth learning arrive later than we'd like. The trick, I think, is simply not refusing them when they finally do." Wren glanced up from across the room, gold eyes bright in a face that was, I had come to understand, neither fully her mother's nor fully her father's, but entirely, unmistakably her own. "Grandmother," she said. She had taken to the word easily with none of her mother's caution, the casual generosity of a child who had simply been told there was more family in the world than she'd known, and had decided without complication to claim all of it. "Are you staying for dinner?" "Sorrel made the good bread today." "I am staying for dinner," I said. "I find I am in no particular hurry to leave." And I was not. I sat on the floor of a converted transit depot in a district my own laws had nearly let die, surrounded by grandchildren the Accord would once have called unfit to exist, watching Doyle set down a supply crate without ceremony and Liana ladle out a meal that needed no court formula to be worth eating. And I understood, with a clarity that 31 years on a throne had never given me, that the family I had nearly lost forever had been here all along, half human, wholly mine and worth. In the end, every golden hall I had ever called home.